Hi, Drew Williams. We're here with Drew Williams today, and we are going to be talking about the Don't Be a Bully project. We don't do that here. And I am so excited and curious to get input from Drew as to how this incredible performance impacted the school where Drew currently works. So, should we get started, Drew?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All
Thank
right,
you.
let's do it. So I understand that you attended the Kennedy Center presentation of We Don't Do That Here in 2024, I believe. And I was told that you got very emotional. And actually
Hmm.
somebody said, I'm not gonna name any names, Drew. I'm not gonna throw anybody under the bus.
Okay,
Somebody
okay.
said you cried like a baby.
I did. I did.
That's
I'm
true.
not ashamed.
So I have to ask, what hit you so deeply in that moment?
Well, so as you walk into our building, we have a quote on the like in the outside of our doorway, and it says, "Art is the greatest teacher of humanity." I believe that with my heart, and this was one of those moments where through art, like in education, of course, Latrice, we talk about bullying all the time.
Mhm.
And, it's something that is always kind of on the forefront of what we do. And I think, and to be very candid, uh, I chose that session at the last minute, and kind of walked in late, or not late, but I just walked in and I was like, I don't know, is this another session about bullying? And then Connie set it up and kind of talked about what it was, and then of course students walked in and they used art to bring um bring such a tough concept in a way that only art can. And I think the reason that art is so powerful is because we see ourselves in different characters, and whether that's the bully or the bullied, or and so when I saw it, it was powerful. We had kind of dealt with some things in our community here in Utah, and so it just hit me like a freight train. And the passion that 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 the students had in the project, the what they were saying,
Mhm.
and singing and acting. I think it was just it was done in such a way that um I just didn't want to hear a boring person get up and talk about bullying. And this was a way that impacted the heart, right? Like the
Exactly.
mind for sure, but the heart. And so immediately, like before the show was done, I was like, we got to get this. We have to bring it. We have to bring it to Utah. And I don't, we Utah has the highest teenage suicide rate in the nation.
Wow. Wow.
And so much of that is bullying, and those even silent bullies, or
Mhm.
institutional bullies, I would say. And so anyway, so I reached out to my musical director and said, I've got this project, and his response was, it sounds awesome, let's do it. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of,
Well,
yeah, I mean, I was like a baby, just bawling, um of how emotional it was. And then to just add a little bit to it, the talk back at the end where I think student voice is so important, and the
mhm,
students were able to put words to power in terms of how bullying affected them, but
mhm,
how they were navigating it. And
mhm.
anyways, it was the like every part of it
Right.
was a powerful experience.
Well, I know you signed on the spot, and I know
Yeah.
you just talked about the experience and what made it meaningful. Dive a little bit deeper into what made that decision feel urgent rather than something optional that you could have done.
Um, we so about a year earlier, we had we had a former student who we had just signed on to be a musical director. Incredible student. And in January of that same year, um, that student took their own life.
Oh,
And and um, and it was so really at that point was a faculty member of ours. I'd known him for almost a decade. And and it was because of bullying.
mm,
Uh, and you know, you you certainly retrace your steps, um, the days and the weeks. I had a text that day. Um,
mm,
we were just actually talking about next year's plans and schedules, and there was so much excitement. Um, and you always wonder, what could I have done? What could I have done? And really a genius that uh, you know they found out that it was bullying,
mm,
essentially. Um, so so that and our population here in Southern Utah, we have quite a bit of LGBTQ plus students, and it's pretty rampant in terms of them being ostracized, othered, bullied, etc. And my daughter had just come out, and so just seeing that, trying to put myself, you know, empathetically into their shoes and understanding kind of how much social media impacts us and how much words matter, and seeing it from kind of a principal standpoint, it just like we don't it can't be in a few weeks, it has to be yesterday.
mhm.
Like for me, the urgency is we needed to do this before today.
Absolutely.
So and there's something about, again, I there's something about art that helps break walls down.
Mhm.
Uh, and so as soon as I saw them, I thought, well, we have essentially a a pretty big issue in Utah, but just even in our own community, and how this can help.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry for your loss, that tremendous loss.
Thank you.
Again, just for the record, we are talking to Drew Williams. He is an award-winning educator and founding head of school at Utah Arts Academy. I can get that out. So
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for joining me. Wow, what a powerful story. And you're absolutely right. We need this now more than ever, but we needed it long before now as well.
Yes.
So you saw the production and then you went back to your colleagues and said, this is something we need here. Tell me how you described we don't do that here to your colleagues and others.
Uh, I probably said it feels like, um I I remember thinking this is like Stomp the musical, but about bullying. That's kind of, I was like, that's what it feels like to me. Um and of course, the we have such an amazing creative team here, and there's a lot of trust, right? So they're just like, all right, if Drew says it's good, let's go. Let's do this.
That's great.
And that's very much reciprocated, right? Like that's not a top-down kind of a thing. Like, you know, we led with the puppet thing. Our artistic director last year said, I want to do puppets. And then we said, okay, we trust you. Let's go. Let's
Let's
do a
do
puppet
it.
thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trust. And then we started working through details, and it's almost like the trust is there, and then we'll figure out the details on what that looks like and how that plays out, as it comes.
Hmm.
Just it's incredible to be on a team like that, and to even add a little more power to it. um, our musical director, Jeffrey, he was colleagues with um, and friends, dear friends with the student that passed away.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so I think, it was like yes, 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 and more yes.
Hmm. Thank you. So you talked a bit about bullying. You talked a bit about how it shows up. Um, Now I'd like to ask you, as an educator for 17 years, how have you seen bullying change in its approach and its showing up? I mean, now it's not just name calling, right? It's such a bigger picture. So, how have you seen bullying showing up differently in your career over these 17 years as an educator?
Yeah, man, I was just having this conversation with some of my colleagues this morning. I um and, we don't have a ton of data. It's really um we're really kind of looking at trends that are happening currently. I think it's worse now than it's ever been. Um, and part of that is that we have, without naming names, we have some leaders at the top who are normalizing pretty poor behavior.
Mhm.
Um, and so we're seeing that show up in students. Um, and whether it's a mean post, um, a lot of what we're seeing is this copycat
Mhm.
of world leaders. I'll put it that way, of world leaders being bullies on a world stage,
Mhm.
and and that trickling down now into families and communities and schools. Um, and the uh, it I in my career, at the beginning of my career, I felt it was a little bit more covert. It would happen in the hallways. It would happen, and now, even in a strong community, I think it happens now much more overt. And when we have conversations with kids about bullying, they're like, "Well, but that's what everyone does.
Mhm.
I saw this on Twitter. I saw this on Instagram. I saw this on."
Mhm.
Um, and or that's how my parents talk to others or talk about others. And so that I think is creating a little bit more of a complex kind of a situation, which makes the "we don't do that here" powerful.
Mhm.
And so we talk a lot about this with our student, we call it student council, but it's our leadership class here, and they meet once a day. And they really, a lot of them are, part of the production. And so that has become, that phrase, "we don't do that here," has become part of our culture, 1,000%. Um, and it is astounding to me when a peer says that to another peer, how quickly it stops the behavior versus an adult saying it, or adult stepping in. And so I, I don't know what the data says, but at least in my career, I feel like we went through a period where we were addressing it and attacking it, and it seems to be getting better. And over the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, it has um, it has kind of shown its ugly head in a much worse way, which is terrifying, to be honest.
Absolutely disturbing. Doing this work, working on We Don't Do That Here with Connie St. John, I have discovered that everyone has a story. Either they are a culprit, they are a target, or they have a story of being an intervener. What's your story, Drew?
Oh, um, woof. Um, so I grew up in the Bay Area, and so I came from a family of five boys. and we all clogged and played bluegrass music. So kind of an artist at heart. When you grow up in a sports-centric high school, so I mean, probably 4 or 5 thousand students in the high school, pretty big school. Um, Being a dancer as a male, that's not a very cool thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was pretty ridiculed. In fact, I remember, pretty classic, feels like a TV story, but um, there was a student, I won't name names, but there was a student who, yeah, I mean, I got thrown into lockers and garbage cans and all the things. And
You were a target.
yes, um and I was a pretty athletic student. And I remember that I tried out for the soccer team my senior year and I made it. And it was a ranked soccer team in the um in the country. And I think that changed how people approached me because
Mhm.
I kind of fit into their world a little bit. And my brother, Spencer, who's probably one of my best buds, you know, he was navigating whether he was bisexual or gay. He was trying to figure that out. And I remember my senior year, he was in a woodshop class and a student kind of was bullying him. And I mean it was kind of constant. And then something snapped in me my senior year. I was a TA in this class,
Mhm.
and this kid kind of went after him. And I snapped. It's the only time I got in a fight in high school. And I remember um my shop teacher, and really he's the one that uh inspired me to be an educator. And I remember my shop teacher coming over to this fight and asking, what happened, what happened. And I said, he's been bullying my brother and et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember exactly what I said. And he looked at the kid and he said, if it ever happens again, I'll be the one that beat you up. Of course, this is early 90s, right? That's
Mhm.
very different now
Different
than
times.
but I remember, and it stopped. It immediately stopped. And I remember, I'm obviously not advocating for violence in any way, shape, or form, but I remember feeling so guilty about letting it get to that point from
Mhm.
my brother. I'd kind of achieved this status, if you will, by making the soccer team. And so it there was something that clicked in me. Um, there was something that clicked in me in that moment where I was like, I can't let this happen,
Mhm.
whether it's my brother or anybody. Um, and so it's kind of been a pact between my brother and I. Um, and so to understand what bullying is and identifying it early and trying to get in front of it early has always been kind of part of my education career. Um, So yeah, I mean, very obvious, like everyone, right? We all have a story. And then I will share this one too. This one's a little bit more. Maybe I've been all three. When I was in college, I had a roommate, and I was very, like I said, I mean, here's my brother who's navigating, trying to figure out where he fits in the world, and um, but what was interesting is I still used language that was horrible. Um, 90s, 80s and 90s language. And I had this roommate and who was in my room in a very predominantly religious school and college. And um my other roommate came to me one day and he said, Drew, you've got to stop. And I'm like, stop what? And he's like, you have got to stop saying stuff about being gay. And I'm like, well, of course I'm okay with it. My brother. And he's like, yeah, but what you say doesn't match what you're doing.
Oh, wow.
And I said, what? Like of course, we're in college and you have that college narcissism happening. And he goes, well, and I won't use his name, although we've since had this conversation and talked about it, but he said, he's like, he came out to me and he's scared to tell you because he feels like you're gonna beat him up.
Oh, wow.
And that was a sucker punch to me. And I think sometimes we think we're anti-bullying or we think we're not hurting others or we think what we say doesn't matter. And in that moment, here's my roommate. I've been roommates with him for 2 years. Again, a good friend of mine, and my brother introduced me to him. And from day one, I was like, oh, he's definitely gay. But what was coming out of my mouth didn't show that support and love. And so I walked up to him, gave him a hug, and I said, Cameron, well, I said his name, but I said, Cameron, it's all good. I know you're, and he said, yeah, but what you say really hurts me. And I said, oh, that's on me, and I will never do that again, and I will always fight for you. Um, so it's interesting, right? Because I don't want to just paint myself as a hero. I was definitely not a hero in that situation, and so I think those three examples were so powerful for me,
Mm-hmm.
tectonic,
Mm-hmm.
um, in my work as an educator and understanding like that and those dynamics, power dynamics, and what that looks like, and all those different things. And so, yeah, I wanted to share that one too because that one was me being a horrible human.
Wow, so
Uh,
powerful. So you've given us an example of when you were a target, then you turned to be an intervener for your brother, and also an example of where you were actually the culprit. And I think it takes courage for us to admit that at some point in our lives, I think we've all been there in all three
mm,
categories in some way, right? Um, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing those personal stories.
yes.
So in your bio, this piqued my curiosity. It says your leadership philosophy centers on humanizing education, moving away from standardized testing and toward fostering a community of curious, engaged learners. So, how
Mm.
does this production align with your philosophy of moving beyond the standardized testing and towards building community?
Wow. Yeah. So at the end of the day, like understanding the humanness of all of us, that we fail, we succeed, and we do it, um, individually, but we also do it as a community.
Mhm.
Um, for me, when I think about education and I think about my schooling, whether that's, K-12 or beyond, the things that have impacted my life are, for instance, that teacher intervening. Um, that teacher, the particularly Bud Finley, who I walked in my senior year and said, I want to build a violin. And he said, I don't know how to do that, but we'll figure it out together. Never in my life am I thinking about learning
Mhm.
or a moment in my life as a test that I took.
Mhm.
Um, and so here at this school, not only do we have the top 10% of ACT scores in the state, and I find that interesting because we have that in spite of the fact that I don't care about standardized testing. And all my students know that about me. Um, and if students feel safe and loved and supported in
Mhm.
their place of learning, they will actually do better on the other things as well. And
Mhm.
so we focused on those three things. And so the project was this way that we could put it in the classroom And now students are talking about it. And they're talking about it not just in class, they're talking about it in the hallways and they're talking about it at lunch. And all of a sudden now bullying is not in the shadows. It's
Mhm.
actually like right out in the open. Um,
Yes.
I I just we have a group like a group Google chat that, it's all legal, but there's a with multiple adults and our student leadership team. And in that chat, it's like, it'll say things. I just got one right before this that said, hey, I saw this interaction between two students. So I stepped in and I said, we don't do that here. But you might want to check on both both parties.
Mhm.
And so I think so much of the time we're scared to have a conversation. And I believe so much in students, and I think that they want to have the conversation and they want to be a part of a solution and they want to be a part of action, and they don't want it to happen. And so they like that conversation, the production creates that conversation and it keeps that conversation moving forward all the time.
So my next question, you kind of answered this a bit, but I do want you to dive in a little deeper. So over 40 years performing on stages all around the world. That's just phenomenal. Let me just say that.
Ah,
That's just wonderful. Um, so what do you think it is about live performances that makes such a powerful tool for addressing issues of this magnitude, like bullying?
um, I I think that there's magic in a live show. I talk to my students a lot about the audience isn't coming and looking for a perfect performance. They're looking for something, and they will attach whatever it is they're navigating in their lives, they will bring that to the performance, and then it'll attach. If they're moved um, by the performance or they're touched by the performance in some way, um, there's something about that human connection. There's something about that energy that's created in that live space. Um, I love music, and I love, of course, I used to love going to record stores and look and finding new records and being so
Mhm.
excited about it. But there is nothing like seeing it live.
Mhm.
And so I think it's the only way I know how to describe it is it's a heart-to-heart conversation versus a brain-to-brain conversation. And we know that the heart-to-heart conversations can move mountains. And so that's to me, that's the power of a live performance
Mhm.
you know, is that heart-to-heart conversation. And like you said, everyone has a story. And so they see this
Mhm.
and it immediately sets up this conduit of heart-to-heart conversations. And then, you know, they leave the performance and they're having that conversation on the car ride home, and they're having that
Mhm.
conversation the next morning as they're drinking coffee. And so it it to me is not a blip in time. It's something that creates conversation and feeling,
I love that.
and you can't let go of that sometimes, right? Like you're
Mhm.
just like, I don't know, it's right there. It's
Certainly.
nagging at my heart. And so um I, and that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, it was like a full connection. And
Oh, I love that. Let's continue on that theme of conversations. As you know, Drew, bullying often thrives in silence, as you've said. So, can you think of any specific conversations that may have opened up that weren't happening before, after having this production? We don't do that here in your school.
yes, I mean, I'll give you a really specific example. So we have eighth grade, and our production group did it for our all of our eighth graders. And we find that that's, seventh and eighth grade obviously is a tough time for anyone. And so when we did that, it's a squirrely bunch of eighth graders. We have about 80 eighth graders, and it's a pretty squirrely bunch. And it was silent.
Mhm.
Um, it was a pretty powerful moment for them to see their older colleagues performing this for them and then having this conversation um and so it's interesting with eighth graders because they'll try to make it a joke or turn it into something, um they want to be interveners. What I saw, at least with our eighth graders, is they want it to stop, and they didn't have the language
Mm.
to be able to address it with friends,
Mhm.
you know? And and so they saw this production, and now all of a sudden we had common language
Mhm.
that they could talk to an adult about, they could talk to their friends about, and it's not difficult psychiatry level language. It's just we don't do that here. And I think it was a moment of shift for that eighth grade class
Mhm.
that they now could talk about it. And they could talk about it with their teacher, and they could talk about it with upperclassmen, and they could talk about it with me. And all of a sudden now they were like, oh, we recognize there might be some stuff, and we didn't know what to call it, how to communicate. And so anyways, I really saw a shift in that eighth grade class, and
Mhm.
they're the ones that I'm seeing a lot of copycat from, from world leaders on whether that's social media or otherwise. And so, you know, does that it's now constant. Teachers are just saying, oh, we don't do that
Don't do that
in this
here.
classroom. Nope,
Yeah.
not here. And and I think that it's like they hear it enough that they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot. I won't do that. So, that it's like Connie said even before the production, they will worm their way. The music will worm their way into your head, and you won't ever be able to forget it. And that's purposeful, right? Because then it's always there, and they're always thinking about it, and always on the back of their mind. And um, so yeah, I think it was a shift, and that shift came from a common language that now they could use.
So you are a father of three. How old are your children, Drew?
So my oldest is graduating this year from high school, and that's a whole so she turns 18 next month. Um and talented singer-songwriter. My middle child, who is absolutely a middle child, um, she's the one that God gives you that's like this was like how you were to your parents, so good
Yeah.
luck with that. She's
Yeah.
she's a lot like me, and but she's an absolute joy. She's a dancer, and I don't think she's ever walked anywhere in her life. She dances everywhere.
I love that.
Um, yes. And then my son, the youngest, he is 11, and he is really into cars and extreme sports. So he is currently practicing his backflip at the skate park,
Oh, wow.
which is terrifying.
I bet.
Yeah. Yeah, he's had some missed attempts. So, but yeah, they
My
all
kids used to do the
and
same, so I get it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah,
have to
you get.
ask you, as a role as a dad, did that play any role at all in your decision to bring We Don't Do That Here to your students?
Oh, yes. Um, and in fact, I think it gave me some common language too, right? That's very simple. At the beginning of this year, um, Beckham, he's my youngest son. Beckham, you can see I like soccer. So Beckham, he yeah, he started kind of all those signs of, he was tired, became pretty reclusive, and just wasn't himself. The light kind of disappeared. And I remember I came home one day from work, and I had this really terrible moment of panic. And he was just asleep on the couch, but I didn't think he was asleep. It was in the middle of the day. And he's very high energy. And so I talked to him and we sat him down, and I kind of used a lot of that language from the production. And eventually he kind of spilled the beans, and it was like, I'm having a problem with some kids at school, and they just keep hammering me and hammering me and hammering me. And so we started digging into it a little bit, and it was pretty rough. And so we were able to connect with the principal at his school, and they were phenomenal. Um, and but I think as a parent, we often think to ourselves, well, this is never going to happen to my kids, or and it does, you know. And it took some time to navigate that with Beckham. And I was so thankful and that we're actually trying to bring it to his school. Um, and so we're trying to find a good time by the end of the year to get the production over to his school, and particularly his sixth grade class, because the principal was saying, I'm seeing it a lot more with my sixth and seventh and eighth grade students. So I like it, even as a dad. And I've kind of, like I shared at the beginning, I've experienced all three sides of this. Um and but even as a dad, like, being able to recognize it and then sit down and kind of talk and use that language was very helpful. um because I also think that the word bully is, that, like, as soon everybody's walls go up almost immediately. And so using the language from the production, I think, helped him be able to articulate what was happening, and then we were able to kind of figure out the deal. And as is a lot of times the case, we found out that, the particular student that was, um, uh, kind of going after, was dealing with some pretty hard things at home,
Mm,
really hard things at home. And so that created even a more powerful conversation with Beckham, and how a lot of times hurt people.
yes. Is Beckham doing better now?
Yes, the light came back, and it was interesting because now he has a relationship with his principal that he didn't have before, and that was what he was most scared about. Was, even though his dad's been a principal his whole life, he was really scared to go to the
Yeah,
principal's
that's
office.
different. You
And
know that, right?
yeah,
It's
and
totally different.
yeah, and he was like, he's actually kind of cool, Dad. And I was like,
Yeah.
yes, he is, and he actually has your best interest at heart. Like,
Did you say, and I'm cool too?
yeah, well, I don't know if he thinks that, but he does sometimes. He's like, you're a different principal because you don't wear a tie.
Oh,
I was
well,
like, no,
thank
I
you
don't
for
even,
sharing that.
oh, I don't wear a tie.
So, how do you hope that students at Utah Arts Academy will carry this message forward beyond the school into their
Oh,
communities?
I think about that in every aspect of education every day. I, it's interesting. We started this last year, so we had a whole group of students, of course, that have graduated and moved on, and they come back and, say hi, and they're doing some pretty amazing work now. Some are in the professional world, some are, at university, etc. And it's interesting. The students that were in that productions, we still talk about it. Um, and I, they it's I think it became like I keep coming back to this. It became this language that we had here that now is kind of spreading beyond Utah Arts Academy. And and I love that. Like even if I make a post on Instagram or something, they'll be like, "Hey, we don't do that here," or just even in jest. But what that means is it's still there, and they're
Mhm.
thinking about that, and they're thinking about what bullies look like and feel like. And my hope at the end of the day is that because we put language to something that they are thinking about it so that they don't have that same experience I had as a college student with a roommate and didn't even realize that I was inflicting harm over many years without thinking that I was. And that that is something now that is front of mind all the time. How am I interacting with humans and how am I being kind all the time? Um, so that's really my hope. The language part I think is powerful and I don't think they'll ever forget it, which I love. It's the simplicity of it that makes it so powerful. And the fact that they learned all the songs and they'll never forget them. So that's also powerful.
Absolutely. So, it's our goal to educate other school leaders about this production. We want students everywhere to walk
Mm.
saying, we don't do that here. So, what would you tell other school leaders who are considering bringing this production to their schools?
Yes, and a conversation, of course, that I've had many times. You can bring a keynote speaker, and we do that a lot. There's a lot of, anti-bullying projects and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, the reason this is so powerful is because it's a heart-to-heart connection. It's not an adult that stands on a stage with a microphone and tells a story. And that's powerful. There's no doubt about it. That's very powerful. But there's something about the fact that it's students to students. And that connection, especially, like it's our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders who are sharing it with 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And that connection and that power of them living right now in this space that's so difficult to come back and say, listen, it's not worth it. You know, it I think it takes a village to change society. I really do. And at with my kids, I love that they have coaches and I love that they have directors who tell them to put their phones away and tell them to go to bed early because we say that as parents and we're just crazy parents. And I remember Emmy came home one day. She's a runner and she came home one day and she's like, I'm going to start eating healthy. And we're like, okay. And, she's like, I'm going to just mostly drink water. Um, and I need to be off my phone by 6 p.m. And we're like, right. Like, we've said that. And she's like, no, you haven't. My coach told me, and my coach knows way more than you. And we were like, we love your coach so much. And so then I'm texting her coach and I'm like, thank you.
Mhm.
We've said it 1,000 times, but some reason, that here's a coach that she trusts from the outside who said the same thing, and now it's locked into her brain. And so I think if we can do that through this production and they can hear their peers, students can hear their peers say these things, it carries so much more power.
Yes, it does.
So
Great.
what I would say to principals that sign up, you can't sign up fast enough. You should have signed up yesterday.
Okay, so let's hit this home. Are you ready? If
Let's
you
go.
sum up why this project matters in one sentence, Drew, just one sentence, why this project matters in our community, what would you say?
Hmm. This project will speak to students' hearts better than anything else.
Well, that does it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking to Drew Williams, an award-winning educator and the founding head of schools at Utah Arts Academy. I am Latrice Harrison, signing off. Back to you, Connie.